Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Rise Up, Ignite Your Life, Voices from the Frontlines. And today we have special guest, Christopher Hoyer, who is not only served over 20 years as an officer, but also is a speaker, author, and advocate for mental health and wellness in the police environment. So welcome, Christopher, to the show.
Thanks, Krista. Appreciate the invite, as always. Thank you.
You are very welcome. So I always like to start with the lighter and more fun subjects. So let's talk a little bit about what brought you to law enforcement in the first place, and was that, a childhood dream?
It was actually more of a fluke, as it turns out. I was a small business owner, construction stuff back in the mid '90s. And I did a job for a guy who turned out to be a police officer for the agency I ended up going to work for, and did the job. It took about 2 weeks, and he met my crew before he met me. And then when I showed up to actually start doing the work, he goes, "Where's your boss?" I go, "I am the boss." And he says, "You go, well, the first question is pretty much like, how old are you?" And I had a baby face, not like I don't still, but after the whole thing was said and done, he said, "Hey, you're a terrific individual. You should think about being a cop." And I'm like, okay. So almost a year to the day after that conversation, I graduated from the academy, first generation law enforcement, and the rest is history after that.
So you were random recruited.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. I mean, back when I was a kid, I had 4 dreams. I want to be a rock star drummer, or I want to be a motorcycle racer, or I want to be a fighter pilot. And then a distant fourth was being a cop. And clearly you can see what happened.
So spontaneity, that's a really interesting quality. And I've noticed that a lot of the people that I interview on this show, they tend to be really go with the flow, kind of spontaneous. Let's just do this because it sounds like the thing to do in this moment kind of people. Do you notice that a lot around you?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's guys that are born to do it, and guys that are, like me, that just kind of fall into it. Other folks that actually do some true research on the whole thing and think, well, maybe fire, maybe police, maybe whatever, and they lean on one particular topic. With me, it was more on the side of, wait a second, I get to carry a gun, drive as fast as I want, and kick indoors. I mean, how can you go wrong there, right? So that was my idea of how law enforcement was going to be. Not too far from the truth, but it was a little bit more than I expected. So
more than you expected. Expand on that.
Well, it's kind of funny. I described this to a lot of my friends, and when I wrote the book, I talked about this. You go through the hiring process, which is a complete nightmare. It's months and months of testing, physically, and the written tests and all these kinds of things, and then you get to the background portion, which is a whole nother conversation. And then you finally get to the pre-hire stage, and then you go to pre-academy, then the academy. You go through that whole thing. You do a couple of ride-alongs in there. 4 to 6 months, give or take, depending on what side of the country you're on. Get out of the academy, and then you go to post-academy, where you learn just specific skills. Then you get on, go to your first precinct, wherever that happens to be. You meet your FTO, you meet all your new future squad mates. You go through this whole rigmarole. You do another 3 or 4 or 5 months, however long it is, with FTO. And then that first day solo, when you go to the front desk gate and you're like, hey, all right, I'm ready for my car. You get your car, you pull up to the gate, and the first question is always, okay, I made it through all this stuff. I'm the cops. Now what do I do? It's like, my very first call, jumping right into it, was an illegal parking call. Okay, and I'm not kidding. I spent an hour going through ops. I'm like, what do I do with this? I mean, we'd never done that before, and all my time on, I'm like, I don't have a clue how to do a legal parking thing. So that took me an hour. Very, very, very second call, probably 7:15 in the morning, out on the street, is an armed robbery, and that's how my career started. And it was like, oh boy, here we go. And fast forward toward my my third precinct that I got to in about 2014-ish, give or take, something like that, 2013. I had been labeled a resident ship magnet in 3 separate precincts at that time. So that tells you anything about my career. So yeah.
So you're the guy that can go wrong at work.
It'll go wrong big time. Oh yeah. And people are very excited to be around me for a couple of different reasons, to either watch me screw up or just see how much stuff I can get myself into. You know, it's kind of funny on both sides.
So no one has ever expressed that feeling of like, training to the real world and that shock factor of, well, I'm training to be a cop. I'm going to be an officer. Now all of a sudden, wait, I am an officer.
Oh yeah.
So that's a really interesting idea, because now you don't have anyone telling you what to do. You went out all by yourself, right?
Oh yeah.
So you're responding to an armed robbery. Do you remember what's going through your mind? And what is that physical reaction of, oh my gosh, this is life or death, that awareness?
Well, the part of the reason why I was resident magnet of trouble basically was because when that call came out, I was literally less than a mile away. It's like, oh boy, I didn't even really have time to think about it. It was one of those things where, it's probably very common. I'm hoping it's not just me, but it may be. I get to the scene and I had forgotten about everything that I needed to do to actually investigate this crime. So I show up, and the first thing I do is ask the guy, what's the guy look like? What's he driving? Oh, it's a red Durango. He was last seen around, driving off northbound. So what do? Instead of staying at the store, which is what I needed to do, take fingerprints, shut down the store, all that stuff, I jump back in the car and start looking for the guy.
You chased?
Of course, the guy's long gone by this point, and lieutenant gets on the radio and he's like, have that unit go back to the store, please. So I go back to the store, of course. And then by that time, the scene is completely contaminated, and I just butchered the whole entire situation. So, and I got a lot of grief for that. I'm like, okay, but I learned how to chase bad guys. I didn't learn how to investigate, thanks to my FTO, which God bless him. But even still, that's what I thought I needed to do. And so, yeah.
I love that. That's awesome. Real world stuff. So you actually managed to retire. You went all the way through your 20 years.
Yes.
Did you have challenges with coping strategies and relationships that fell apart and the stress of the job?
Huge. Oh yeah, big time. Just for the record, 20 years and 64 days. And yes, toward the end I was counting. So I'm the poster child for law enforcement. So failed marriage, had issues with my department, had issues with some of my squad mates, got involved with just multiple critical incidents. On the bad side of things, buried 16 of my buddies in the line of duty, which is just unheard of. And then after I retired, there was 3 more within a 2-year period. So there's almost 20 guys in just over 20 years that showed up to work and didn't go home. And so dealing with all that stuff was very, very difficult. On the good side of things, though, I had a ball. I did. I had the time of my life all the way up till probably about my 13th year, and then I was completely burned out, which was really strange because I had a brand new awesome partner, had a brand new Tahoe, just got my brand new rifle, brand new area. Everything was just falling into place, but I was just done. And I think the cumulative stress had caught up with me at that point in time, and I just didn't know how to deal with it. And I got cornered, and my commander was like, hey, said whatever he said to me that got me back motivated, and I got back at it, and I was doing great until then my 18th year, and everything fell apart for the rest of my career after that one, which is a whole long story. So, yeah.
So do you feel like, let's go back to, you said you'd lost 16?
Yes.
Of your coworkers on the job. Was that all line of duty, or did you lose people to suicide as well?
That was every single one of them was line of duty. Every last one. We did have one outside that was suicide. They didn't consider that then as line of duty like they do now. So if you count that one, that would have been 17 really in all reality. So
what is normal? Because you kind of mentioned that seemed like it was a little bit excessive for your department. What is like average for your department?
Man, I would say we lost. I mean, as you put the numbers together, we lost on average almost one a year. I would say for a city our size, if it's one every 3 or 4 or 5 years, that's probably, I would venture to say and guess that's probably more accurate. But I mean, I don't really know. And that doesn't include also guys that, retired and had heart attacks or cardiac arrests or, all these other kind of things, left a job, got hit by a car or whatever else. So we had several others that were, that passed, shortly after retirement or whatever. And that's just my agency. I'm not even talking about the surrounding agencies as well, which are probably pretty close to ours, collectively, if you will. So,
Right. I don't know if you can answer this, so it's totally okay to say you don't know. Have you noticed the numbers increasing in the line of duty? Well, all causes really, but the line of duty deaths. Do you feel like that's increasing?
100%, absolutely. There's no question about it. Despite all that you and I are doing together to help, our community, we're still seeing a huge uptick in, just assaults against us. And that, I mean, you blame that for whatever reason, could be political, could be a lack of training, could be too much stress on the job, whatever it happens to be. But there's definitely been way too many. I mean, just this year alone, I don't even know what the numbers are, but it's staggering. It's just, it's insulting really is what it is. So
I do a lot of research, and I've been a little bit challenged to find anything that solidly supports the idea that that there are shifts, that the cultural shift exists, that we who are in it, like, we see it, we know there's a cultural shift. There's a violence against officers that didn't exist before. There's the ambush style situations are just occurring more and more. People are being shot in their vehicles before they even get out. So this is not the way things used to be. But to find actual scientific research that's been done on public perceptions and how that's increasing, this idea that the rules and regulations matter less and that the respect for officers is on the decline, all of that we're just observing as insiders. And science is going to take a long time to catch up to all of that. So we can't really quote exact statistics, but noticing those shifts that we see from the inside, what do you think the repercussions are on the officers that are getting in their cars every day, that increased stress of fear of death?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. It's got to be one of those things where you can't do your job if you're in fear that you're not going to make it home, because fear causes hesitation, right? And that's what will cost you your life very oftentimes. It is kind of an interesting thing if you think about it, because if you go back to, I say my generation of guys, which I'm still in that that portion, if you will. We were like a bunch of hard hitting go-getter type guys that went out there and did a lot of hardcore stuff, which of course with that brings more violence against us, because if we're up in your face and chasing bad guys, the chances of getting into a dangerous situation are much higher. Nowadays, you push the other direction where it's, the kinder, gentler, we're not doing donuts, we're doing bagels, these kinds of things. And you've got guys that are, it's the hug-a-thug theory, which shows some submissiveness on, the view of the bad guys. And they think that, well, the officers don't have what it takes to take care of themselves, so I'm just going to take advantage of that. So it's two kind of different sides of the spectrum. But the fact of the matter is, and this goes back to training too. I'm the biggest advocate on training in the world, because you go out there to whatever training venue you happen to be on and you don't take it seriously, and as an instructor, that's incredibly frustrating, because be on the rifle range and guys are just, they're kind of him-hawing around. And I'm like, guys, you realize what we're doing here, right? I mean, this is serious stuff. And if you don't take it seriously, how you act here is probably how you're going to act on the street, and if you're already not taking it seriously, you're hesitating, you're behind the curve, and you've got violence against you, you're going to lose that fight every single day. So,
Yeah, that big difference between, you can look at it as checking boxes and certification, and that's cool. We got to have that. But what skills do you actually have on board that you have practiced to the level of instinctualness? What reactions have you trained?
I talk about this quite a bit where, you know, you train at over at least 100%, because if you don't train at least 100%, you're already behind the curve. And on average, if you're lucky, you might be at about 70, maybe 80, if you're really hardcore and you're going at it with everything you got. If you're training at, you know, 60 to 70%, you're not going to survive it. You're just not. I mean, we're talking obviously like critical incident, major stuff here. So, but that's not limited to just, you know, gunfights and investigations and these kinds of things. You're talking about your mental survival as well, which is huge, because if you're not taking care of yourself mentally, you'll end up like I did in your 18th year going, I don't understand why I can't stop crying and I'm falling down on my knees having anxiety attacks. And it's like, what happened here? You know, so.
Right. And I like the way you put that, mental survival. We're challenged. I was just having another conversation with someone that we're challenged to have this conversation without going to diagnosis and mental illness and this whole stigma and this whole big thing. But what we're really trying to talk about is real world stuff, real world, like wellness and coping and stress relief and stress reduction. We're not necessarily always talking about post-traumatic stress disorder and suicidal ideations. And we're talking about a spectrum of cumulative trauma reactivity that if you're on the job, you're dealing with stress. If you're on the job, you're dealing with experiences that need to be integrated. Like if you're not having reactivities, there's something wrong with you.
Yeah.
So we're not having the open conversation of, this is not, you're broken. This is everyday stuff. This is normal training for everyday stuff that all of you are going to face. And until we can have that conversation that way, we're doomed.
I agree. I put it in the context of how officers can relate to it. Not that that doesn't work. But what I say is you can't go through a career and see the stuff you see and expect to be okay, because you can't. I mean, it's impossible, you know, and there are simple ways to fix it. I mean, the biggest issue that I've come across with, you know, getting guys and gals fixed is just getting them to that point where they can say, hey, I need help, you know, because as first responders, I don't care what we're doing, nurses, you know, firefighters, whatever you are, even military guys, same exact thing. You know, what do? We're pounding our chest. Yep, I'm good. Dude, no, you're not. I mean, I was just talking to a friend of mine the other day, and she did a ride along, and she thinks she wants to go back to my old agency and be a reserve. Well, in one day as a civilian, she saw a guy that had killed himself, and a house that had burned down, and a cat was killed in the fire. And she's completely traumatized. And that's, I mean, I get it. She's a civilian. She's not completely trained on all the stuff that we deal with and so forth and so on. But the fact is, you're still a human. You're still an organic person, and you're going to be seeing these things. And I mean, obviously, we're talking about the worst of the worst. But let's not forget, you know, let's say, hey, you happen to work third shift. You don't get off work till 6 o'clock, and you got to be at court at 9 o'clock in the morning. Is that going to create some sleep deprivation? Yeah. What about your boss and attacking you because you didn't finish that report, or you didn't drop your leave slip, or what? And so now you've got all this negativity on the street, and then you've got all this negativity from your bosses. Not that it's not justified or whatever else from that side of the fence, but it's still stress that you've got to deal with. And you're like, dude, do you have any idea what kind of crap I went through last night? And now you're busting my chops because I didn't freaking drop my slip in time. I mean, give me a break, you know? So it builds, it just does. So.
Yeah. And then you go home and your significant other says, what's wrong?
Yeah.
And you say nothing.
I'm good. Like we do, you know, and you get into like Kevin Gilmartin talks about getting in that magic chair, you know, and you know, it's a problem when you're ignoring your significant other. And then, you know, he kind of jokes about it when they stand in front of you, and instead of acknowledging what they're asking you, you're leaning to the side so you can change the channel on the TV. That's a problem. That's a huge problem. It needs to be addressed, because if you're not talking to them, you're probably talking to somebody else, is my theory. And the accusations begin, and then you're like, no, it's not because I don't want to talk to you, but I'm trying to protect you, it's bullshit. I'm sorry, but it is. You're not protecting your significant other by hiding what you're dealing with. It doesn't work. So that's my opinion. So.
No, that's an excellent opinion. It's one of the foundations of our organization is incorporating significant others and families in the training process so that they actually understand what it means to be married to a first responder. What does it mean to be the support person for that person? And
That's absolutely huge. I mean, I wish I had gone through that back when I was going through all my stuff, but so be it. That's my generation of law enforcement. So,
right. It all came because we deal with hundreds of people every year and listen to their stories. And we were noticing that the couples that were doing really well were couples where both of them were first responders of some sort. So they felt comfortable coming together after shift and just saying, this is the stuff I dealt with today, because they didn't have that preconceived notion that they had to have their experiences. They could have that dark humor together. They could have that, I saw this, and not have to filter and protect their person from their experiences.
and that's the belief that most of the guys in my generation, that's how they were trained, that don't tell your other half or whatever else, even your family, what's going on, because they don't need to know that you kicked in the door and knocked this guy's head off and all this other stuff. Well, maybe they don't need the specific details of all these kinds of things, but my ex, as soon as I walked in the door, she knew what kind of day I had, and clearly if I'm not talking, there's something going on. You're hiding something. What is it? No, that's not what I'm doing. This is what I was trained to do. So, and we take it to heart, which is, again, silly, but
right. There's that middle ground for normal couples where you can come home and say, yeah, I had a really stressful day and I had a call that was very violent and I had to do things I didn't want to do. And I'm struggling with my moral, I'm having guilt. You don't even have to say what happened or anything. You can still share your emotions and still deal with the traumatic experience in a way that helps eliminate the risks for post-traumatic stress, because statistically speaking, if we talk about it immediately and process the emotions of the experience, you're much less likely to have those long-lasting reactivities. So we teach our spouses to be our perfect debrief partner without having to go into huge amounts of details.
I think that's wonderful. I just love that you guys do that. And I think that needs to be much more, prevalent up in everybody's faces. And I understand the concept of why, because they think that, well, if I tell my significant other what's going on, they're worried about me and I don't want them worrying about me. Well, okay, but you've got to reassure them. Like with my mom, when I got in my first rifle shooting back in 2013, I was kind of passively telling her about it, and she flipped out. And this is just on the phone, and she wouldn't let it go. And I said, Mom, you got to understand, I'm one of the best trained officers in the country because of how we operate where we work. I said, yeah, it was a dangerous situation, but I have the tools, I've got the skills, I've got the mindset to make it through these kinds of things. And I had to reassure her of that over and over and over again. And of course, I was still on the department when I'm telling her this. And then a couple of years later, I got into really the worst one I've ever experienced my entire life. But the fact is, it's like, look, you've got to trust me that I'm a professional and this is what I do for a living, and crossing that threshold is not easy. I'm not going to say it's an easy thing, especially when, you kiss your significant other, first responder person, and walk out the door and it's 12 or 13 hours later before they come back. And that whole 12 or 13 hours, you're going, oh my God. So, I mean, it's incredibly difficult for those guys as well to process, what are we doing all day long? Are we in danger? Are we getting shot at? Is something going to happen? Am I waiting for that phone call? And I had a couple of my buddies showed up just because they were in my neighborhood one day in uniform and knocked on my door. And she thought, oh my God, here it comes. She was already crying before they even got to the door. And they knew I was off that day, but I was off. I was actually at the range and they didn't realize that. And so she just thought that I was on the range and I got shot. And it's like, oh, so, I mean, that's a huge thing that they've got to process through as well. So I completely acknowledge that. So.
Yeah, it's taking what you said, that I'm one of the best trained and I'm ready, I'm prepared for this work, and contradicting that with the end result of people who take their guns in the parking lot and shoot themselves. There's a huge discrepancy in can people confidently say, I'm completely prepared for this mentally? I have the tools and resources that I need to cope with this experience. And if they can't, how are we allowing that failure to continue?
Right. That's an excellent point too. And this is just my opinion, but I'm of the belief that you can be as mentally and emotionally prepared as you think you are. And, we absolutely need to. And I thought that I thought that I had role played every scenario that I could, what could happen here, what could happen here. But the truth is, and it's a harsh reality of what we deal with, is like, you're not going to know until it happens. You're just not, like in my case, on my 20th anniversary, my best friend loses his dog in the deployment. I'm like, how could I ever have dreamed up that scenario? And I completely crashed all over again. It's like, holy shit. I mean, and I mean, I had been through some seriously major things already at that point in time. And that was just one more, to the chink in my armor going, hey, this is one more thing now you've got to deal with. And how could I ever possibly prepare myself for that? I mean, I thought that I had, and I did a very good job of that after the fact. But up until that moment, it was like, and then, it was another several weeks of falling down, crying all over again. And I'm like, oh my God. Now, of course, I got to support my friend and dealing with my own emotional side of things. And it's like, okay, well, what I realized from that situation was that's one of those things that you're not going to know how to handle it until it happens. And it sucks. It just does. But,
Right. The multi-dimensional conversation about what we need to do to incorporate actual help for our officers. Training and preparation is only one part. Processing is another part.
And seeking that help, whatever it is, be it your clergy, your squad mates, your spouse, professional, the psychiatrist, psychologist, whatever it is. One of our guys was our chaplain on my old department, and this guy talked me off the ledge on pretty much a weekly basis for the most part, which was great. It was exactly what I needed at the time to get me where I wanted and needed to be. So getting to that point where you realize that, having this conversation that we're having right now is all great. It's a great starting point, but it's not going to cure all your problems. You need to take it to the next level, and you've got to admit to yourself that that's what you need to do. When you get to that point, it's so easy to fix yourself. It really is. It takes time. It does. You just have to be willing to do it. So.
Yay. Thank you for saying that. That is, people want either a magic pill, they want it yesterday, they want the what is the one-off solution? Like, what's the one thing that we can do to change this? And I'm like, well, it's really much more complicated than that. But it's a lot of really simple, easy to access pieces. So if you address all these different things all the time throughout your entire life, you build good habits, you build good resiliency, you build coping strategies, you build relationships, you build connections, you build trust. And you just have to build all the pieces at the same time. But they're there. They're all accessible. They're not expensive. They're not out of reach. They're really easy to access. It's there for all of us.
I couldn't agree more. And the great part is that, when you have all these pieces in place, not only is it just going to make you healthier mentally, but it's going to make you a better first responder when you get out there. And I'm not going to lie, say that the people that we serve don't deserve our 100% dedication, because they do, and if you're that guy like I was, and I'm probably operating at about a 40% mental state at that time during my last couple of years on, the citizens deserve better than that. They do, and it's like, I'm getting very upset with people over their issues. And it has nothing to do with them. It's all about me, because I wasn't processing through properly like I needed to be doing. And so they're getting shortchanged. Of course, now that upsets them. So they're calling my boss. My boss is, attacking me, going, dude, what's your problem? And I'm so wrapped up in it because I didn't take care of myself. And it's a vicious cycle. It just was, so. And now I can say it because it's easy for me. And I will acknowledge this as well. Sitting over here in, my little beach house in San Diego, telling, well, you need to do this and this. Well, yeah, you're tired. You're living your best life ever. We're still out here chasing bad guys and dealing with all the bad stuff. So yeah, come back and try it again and see how well you do. I get that too. I'm not trying to say that's not an easy task. So anyway, so
Talk about your story a little bit. Like, what was your pivotal moment or your like the trauma story that you tell?
The big one was you mentioned this earlier. It was an ambush. It was my first gunfight, fourth officer involved shooting at that time. So um, got my first shooting in my first year on, second shooting, second year on, first rifle shooting in my 15th year, and my career-ending rifle gunfight in my 18th year. The bad part about that was, and I explained this to folks that don't really understand the dynamic of it, 4.5 second gunfight, basically, where a buddy of mine was killed in front of my face. Bad guy shot and missed me by just, I mean, literally centimeters. I actually heard and felt the rounds go past my head. And then I got to put this guy down with two separate volleys of fire with 22 rounds of rifle before this guy finally went down. And that wasn't because I wasn't making connection. The guy just wouldn't go down. He was inside of a car, which didn't help either. But so that was my moment where my whole life just changed completely. My whole trajectory just completely changed. So
even having other shootings, what was it about this one that was so impactful for you?
Well, the other three, yeah, they were impactful, but not to the point where I was having nightmares and falling down and all these kinds of things, because mostly it was actually kind of simple. I mean, in a joking way, if you will, target turns, raise and fire 2 rounds, and then wait for the pizzas. No big deal, right? And that's kind of what it was on those other three, except for this one. Even though I'm a tactical instructor and do all this rifle stuff, do all this great stuff out there on the range and everything else, and I had trained at what I considered well over 100%, I still failed several times during this situation. My number one failure was not recognizing the difference between a shooting and a gunfight, because every other time I had defeated my opponent and it wasn't a big deal. Well, this time, when I put that first volley of rounds down range, the guy started shooting back at me, and that's a failure right there. I'm like, wait a second, holy cow, this should have been done. And then you add into, just the fact of losing an officer the way we did, exceptionally violently, shot twice, once in the head. The survivor's guilt, because I was out there watching the house for 13 minutes by myself. When my buddy rolls up on the scene, guy is sitting inside the car, opens up, kills my friend. So I've got to deal with that whole thing. The fact that Dave, my buddy, was shot at 3 times and killed, I was shot at 3 times and survived. That's obviously, you can see building and building and building. And it wasn't just that particular situation. That was definitely the one that pushed me over the edge. It took me 2 years to recover from. It was also 18 years prior of stuff like exactly what we're talking about, where I hadn't taken care of myself like I needed to be. That whole time, pounding my chest, going, "Yep, I'm good. I'm good." But the beginning of 2016, when this happened, started with me watching an 8-year-old hang himself right in front of me. What freaking 8-year-old hangs himself? And then 2 of my friends got into a really nasty gunfight. They survived it. But because I was doing a search warrant at the time, I was writing the paper on it, I couldn't be there to help them. Fast forward, the guy that should have been arrested on that search warrant was let go. And about 3 or 4 months later, I get a call from a friend of mine going, "Hey, did you hear the news?" I go, "No." He goes, "Well, that guy that was released that day, because the officers that were on that scene wanted to secure for the day, so they didn't hook the dude up. He ends up going down to another city and kills 3 people." It's like, I made a point that when this guy shows up, if he does, please arrest him, because we got charges on him for whatever. No, we're not going to do that. And then, so technically speaking, on my watch, this guy ended up killing 3 people, 3 innocent people, and almost kills a 4th, another officer from another agency that he got into a shooting with. And just miraculously, the officer survived it. And, so now I've got all that weighing on me. And then Dave is killed. And then it's just, by that time I was too far gone to recover emotionally from all the trauma I had seen.
What was your sense of like mortality? What kind of thoughts did you have around your life?
Funny you say that, because I had most of my life I was raised in a very religious kind of a household, and it was more like shove it down your throat kind of stuff. And of course, as a kid, it turned me away from it. I'm like, no, this isn't my thing. When I got older, in my early to mid 20s, I started, looking at the spirituality side of things. I started thinking, oh, well, maybe there's something bigger and better out there for me, And my theory, which was very, very ignorant on my part, was, hey, when God shows me that sign, then I'll start to believe, okay. And obviously over time, I had gotten far more educated and learned a lot more, but I still hadn't really transitioned over into having that relationship with God, if you will. When Dave was killed, that was the sign. And I'm pretty sure God's going, oh, you want a sign? Well, here you go, kid. Here's your sign. Holy cow. And so when I started to realize that, as much as I like to think that we can control bad guys, we can control a pursuit, we can control all these things, how much control do we really have? And when I came to the conclusion that as much control as I like to think I have, I really don't have any, and pretty much gave myself away to the fact that, okay, well, my time is already up. I just don't know when it is. And so I started not fearing death anymore, and then I started to actually live. I'm like, hey, I mean, I I'm living a great life, my best life ever as we speak right now. And I had a ball, like I said earlier, I was having the time of my life chasing bad guys and this kind of stuff. But failed marriage, my daughter won't talk to me anymore, things like that are still going on in my life. I'm going, okay, but I still have a lot more I need to do with my life. So I'm going to live every single day like it's my last day. And that's my mortality theory, if you will. So long answer, sorry. So
No, that's what we're here for. We want to hear your real story. We want to hear what drives you, what motivates you. What are you doing now to help other people? Because I know we never get out of that industry. If you're a helper, and you're going to die a helper.
Amen to that. Yeah. Just for the record, cops never retire. We'll leave the job, but we always find something else because we're just too busybodied to just sit on the couch. It just is what it is. So, you're either going to get into woodworking like a lot of my friends do, or get into real estate, or, you stay, like in my case, I know we talked about this before the show started. I've got an obligation to where I feel like I've got to share my story for other people so I can help them to navigate through their whatever they happen to be. So for me, my motivations are doing these kinds of shows, getting up in front of an audience and speaking about my story, giving a presentation, which, by the way, I'll travel anywhere in the country and show my stuff, talk about it. Writing the book, which my girlfriend, before I met her, was my editor, and then we ended up falling in love and all that kind of stuff. And she says it on a regular basis that writing that book is what saved my life. And I absolutely highly encourage everybody in the world to, even if it doesn't get published, write a book and just either have it for yourself, for your kids, or it does get published and then you can end up like I do, having it hanging on the wall, and just you're passing it out to people all over the place, so all these things.
So what's the name of your book?
I call it When That Day Comes, Training for the Fight, because the day will come and it's going to be some kind of a fight, whatever it is, whether it's you find out that your daughter's pregnant and you're like, oh, I mean, it's a good fight. Don't get me wrong. It's still a fight because now you got your son-in-law and you're kind of gazing at him like, nah, I know what you're doing with my little girl over here. So yes, the day came, and now it sounds so incredibly strange for me to say that I'm a grandfather. And I'm like, wait a second, I'm only 22. I can't be a grandfather. However, it is what it is. And the other side of the fence where it's, you got a situation like I went through where you have a buddy that's killed in front of you, that's clearly a fight too. And how you prepare for that is a lot about what I wrote about. So
is it available on Amazon?
It is. Yes. I got, that's another story too. So I did my original version, and later on I realized that I didn't really include the dispatch community enough in the first copy, if you will. So I went back and I wrote that story, and I wrote 3 other stories, including 2 from very close friends of mine from other agencies. And then I reached out to Dave Grossman, who is one of my biggest heroes in the world. And I said, hey, would you mind just taking a look at it? And then fast forward a couple of weeks later, he comes back with this terrific email and writes just a phenomenal forward. I've got his name on the book. So now I've got the 2nd edition, and which is also available on Audible too. So
So for those of you watching not the live version, who are watching our Anchor version, the link to his book on Amazon will be listed right below the podcast, so you can easily get access to that. And I usually have the opportunity to read people's books before the show, but we literally connected last week, well, beginning of this week. So we got this recorded really quickly. So I have not had the opportunity to read it yet. But once I read it, if it's a resource that I think my audience really needs to have, I will, with your permission, put the link also on our resources on our website for the nonprofit, because there's not enough stuff out there.
No, I agree. I'd be absolutely honored if you would. And I just got to throw it out there. This is a quote from Dave Grossman. He says it's the best law enforcement prep book he's ever read, which I'm thinking, dude, I'm a regular old freaking street cop. I don't know anything about writing a book. The joke is I can never write a report, but I can write a book. But when I got that endorsement, I couldn't believe it. I'm like, dude, okay. So now, of course, it's, completely pride filled. And I try to share it with as many people as I can, not for the money, because I'm not making any money on this thing whatsoever. That's never been the purpose of it either. But just to get out there and show my vulnerabilities and my honesty about what I went through and how I not only came out of it, but survived it. And I'm thriving like never before. So
I think that's a huge key. I think there's lots of textbooks. There's lots of mental health information. I think the real key is, how are we going to tell these stories in a way that it actually reaches the people that it needs to reach and they get the message? True.
Now, I'm not going to lie. There are some tough reads. Some of the stories in there I talk about where, you're talking about reading an officer getting killed. I don't really get into the graphic part of what actually happened with that. I do explain the tactical side of things and this kind of stuff, but more it's the aftermath of, again, why I can't figure out why I'm having anxiety attacks and what I did to solve that problem and how I can help other folks solve their problems, whatever it is. And it's just a good resource. It's entertaining too. There's a lot of funny stuff in there that, people will definitely appreciate. I can't tell you how many guys going, dude, I thought you were writing about me when you wrote that story. I'm like, no, because that was me. I swear I did the exact same thing, which is great. So a lot of folks can really relate to it. And it's not just related to the law enforcement community. Yeah, it is a cop book and it does tell mostly cop stories, but it is just a life guide almost, if you will.
So I'm noticing the flag beside you has a lot of writing on it. Is that a story you can tell me?
That's a great story. Yeah. So that, I kind of stole that idea from somebody else, which, for liability reasons, I'm only kidding on that, but, I can't even remember what year it was. I think it was early 2020. Got invited to go speak in Virginia, and I had been doing my presentation for a couple of years at that point, and it had gotten a little bit bigger and more detailed, if you will, and more practical. And so I started becoming a lot more confident in doing my stuff, especially when, I've got agencies that are willing to fly me literally across the entire country just to hear what I have to say. I'm like, oh, you sure you want me? But it was huge. I'm like, wow, okay. So I'm taking it on board, and I decided maybe I'll, I had this flag, I ordered it. I don't even know how I ended up with this particular one, but I like the Betsy Ross style, 13 colony star thing. Brought it with me, and I had a whole bunch of markers, and I literally just laid it on a table across from where Natalie and my girlfriend were selling books, and just started inviting people over just to sign their name, put their serial number, their agency, I love you, I hate you, whatever they wanted to say, just kind of leave a mark, and now it's completely filled up. There's barely a square inch left on there for anybody else to sign it. And so clearly I didn't quit after that. So now I've got 3 of them that are almost completely full, and I'm just going to continue on. Everywhere I go, I have a flag with me. In fact, I'm leaving for Denver for my full-time work. I'm bringing that flag with me in case I run into first responders or veterans or anybody else that I think would be somebody that would probably want to be part of this whole thing. And at some point in time, when I've got a place that's big enough, I'm just going to make a big giant flag room or whatever it's going to be. So yeah. So
that is an amazing idea. And my committee and I were just talking, yesterday about we are doing a embroidered flag every year for the heroes that we honor with Battle to Be every year, and we're at about 300 to 400 names that get added every year. So it's
Wow.
like we should auction those flags at the end of the year so people can have that opportunity to have that memorial on their walls.
Yeah.
But your idea just sparked the opposite side of that, that as we're at these events and we're meeting with families, and wouldn't it be amazing to allow them to write their person's name and their dates of service and whatever message they would want to write to those people? So you've kind of inspired an additional piece to that project that I think people really want to be seen and heard and understood.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Those small things like that allow them to feel like they matter.
It's huge. I mean, it's such a thing. I mean, more often than not, I get people that are like, you sure you want me? I'm like, dude, are you kidding me? It's my honor to put you on my flag. I mean, it is. I'm not gonna lie. It's just for me, my own personal stuff. But it's a great reminder. Sometimes I'll just be standing here, just reading some of the messages that are on there, and it's also a great way for me to remember that I've got friends that put their names on there, and I forgot. I'm like, man, I haven't reached out to Ron for like 4 months. I should probably reach out to this dude and let him know, hey, what's going on, man? And that's a great way just to stay in contact with my friends too, which is just completely awesome. So
you say Ron, and I'm like, Rufio.
Yeah. He was literally the very first one in Virginia to get on there. Yeah, that's so funny.
He is an awesome person. He is an awesome person.
Yeah, how funny. Yeah, I just talked to him the other day too, as a matter of fact. So
yeah, another one of those weird coincidences. Now that we say that, he was on my to-do list last week, and I didn't actually connect with him. I'm like, oh, I haven't seen him in a few months.
Oh, yeah.
It is so hard to connect with all the people you want to connect with all the time.
It is, yeah. And I feel guilty that sometimes, I've got people that I haven't reached out to for quite a while. In fact, I was reaching out to a friend. I thought he still lived in Colorado, and I forgot that he moved to Florida. I go, hey, we're going to be in town. And he's like, dude, I moved to Florida a year ago. I'm like, oh, man. Okay, I'm so sorry, because now I look like a jerk. He's like, no, I know you got a lot going on. So
this is what family looks like.
100%, and Natalie and I, we talk about it, and I mean, you just proved it right there. Our world gets smaller every single day. It's unbelievable. The people that I have connected with that know other people that, yeah, I know this guy over here, well, how do you possibly know this person? Oh, we connected wherever, wow. Okay. So yeah, it's unbelievable. So
we're on the same mission. It's inevitable.
Yeah. And it's good. It's a good inevitability. I love it. It's just great, and especially when you don't hear from somebody for quite a while, and all of a sudden you're like, hey, remember we did that thing? And I'm like, no. And then I get a memory will spark, and then I'll be going, oh yeah. So it's awesome. I just love it. So
okay, so we're running out of time, but is there any final words of wisdom or any last words you want to leave with our audience?
I usually try to dedicate something, usually in the beginning, to whoever it is. So if you're okay with it, we'll dedicate it to all of our officers that are fallen this year. Everybody say a little quick prayer for all those folks. It's another long conversation. I'll keep it really short, but for folks that are in that stage of being burned out and they can't figure out, should I stay? Should I not stay? Something that I figured out when I moved out to San Diego back about 4 years ago. I was actually testing for another agency, even though didn't work out, because I realized that I can't go back. A whole nother long story. But I found my oath of office and all my stack of awards and all that kind of stuff. And I actually read it for the first time in probably 20 years. I mean, like, physically sat down and read the whole thing, which is only a couple of paragraphs long or whatever else. And it ignited such a huge thing in me that I'm like, man, I had forgotten how important what I did for 20 years was. I mean, the impact that I had on my own personal life, professionally, the people, the citizens that I served, I mean, it was huge. It actually was what helped me motivate to want to go back and do it again. And the thing I took away from that mostly was reminding myself of sitting in that background investigator's office with my suit on, going, I'll do whatever it takes. I'll do whatever it takes, and having that love just flowing back through me again. I'm like, wow. I mean, and then I reflected back on my career going, dude, I mean, I was absolutely honored and privileged to be able to do what I did. And so I advise folks, don't forget that. I mean, because that's a huge thing, because how many people you know can't or won't do what you do, you know? So I'll end it with that. So.
Perfect. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Absolutely. My honor. My honor.
Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. Please, if you don't know about our Ferryman project, go to battle2be.org. You can support this podcast there, or you can sponsor a mission where we'll take a plaque to a family of a fallen hero and attend memorials, and we bring education and training opportunities to all sorts of first responder organizations to ensure that the next generation coming up is less vulnerable and more resilient. Coping strategies and skills that are needed to not just be amazing officers, but to have amazing lives as well at home. So again, please reach out to battle2be.org if you're interested in our organization. We'll leave a link for Christopher's book underneath this podcast so you can easily grab a hold of that. And we will see you guys next week.